My name is Leora Bennett. I'm 31 years old, and today I run a small architectural restoration firm in Portland. My job is simple on paper. I restore old buildings people think are beyond saving: cracked foundations, warped beams, doors that haven't opened in decades. Sometimes I joke that I specialize in broken things. But there's one door in my life that never reopened, not for 10 years. And the strange part? The people who slammed it shut were the same ones standing on my porch last winter, knocking like strangers. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you how that happened, how my parents, the same ones who banned me from their house at 16, ended up begging on my doorstep a decade later, I need to ask something small from you. If this story resonates with you, take a second to like and subscribe. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I always find it fascinating to know where people are listening from. All right, let me take you back. Because this story begins with a door. And something I've learned since then is this: doors remember, even when people pretend they don't. The knock on my door came on a Tuesday evening, December 14th, 6:42 p.m. I remember the exact time because I was standing in my kitchen, staring at a blueprint spread across the counter, trying to figure out how to stabilize a century-old staircase without gutting the entire frame. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the dishwasher. My house. Even now, that word still feels strange. For years, I lived in places where the locks barely worked and the neighbors argued through thin walls. But this place was different. 2 floors, large front windows, a porch light that cast a soft yellow glow across the driveway, and a solid oak front door, the kind that closes with weight. I heard the knock again, 3 times, slow, firm. Not the casual knock of a delivery driver, something heavier. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked toward the door. The security camera screen near the hallway flickered on automatically. 2 figures stood on the porch. Older, tired, familiar. And for a moment, my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. Because standing under that porch light were the 2 people who had once told me, very clearly, "You are not welcome in this house anymore." My mother and my father. 10 years. 10 full years since I had seen them in person. And now they were here, at my door. I didn't open it, not yet. Instead, I stood in the hallway staring at the screen. My father looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders hunched forward like the weight of the air itself was too much. My mother kept glancing toward the street like she was afraid someone might see her there. Which was almost funny, because once upon a time she had wanted people to see, wanted the entire neighborhood watching as a 16-year-old girl stood on the front lawn with a backpack and nowhere to go. Watching as the door slammed shut behind her, watching as the lock clicked. And that girl realized something that would take years to fully understand. Doors remember, even when families pretend they don't. The knock came again, louder this time. My father leaned forward toward the camera like he knew it was there. His voice carried faintly through the door. "Leora, we know you're home." My stomach tightened. Not fear, not exactly. Something colder, something steadier. The strange calm you get when the past finally catches up with the present. I glanced down at my phone sitting on the kitchen counter. 3 unread emails, 1 missed call from a contractor, a message from my assistant asking about Thursday's inspection. My life. A life I had built piece by piece after being told I didn't belong anywhere. And now the two people responsible for that were standing outside my house, knocking. Another pause. Then my mother spoke. Her voice sounded thinner than I remembered. Please, Leora. Please. That word had never existed in our house before. Not when I was 16. Not when they decided my life for me. Not when they told the neighbors what they thought I had done. And definitely not on the night they locked the door. But standing there in the quiet hallway, staring at their tired faces on the security screen, I realized something strange. They didn't look angry. They didn't look proud. They looked desperate. And that was the moment I understood. Something had happened. Something big enough that the two people who erased me from their lives were now standing on my porch asking to be let in. But before I tell you why they came, or what they thought I would do when I opened that door, you need to understand what really happened the night I was 16. Because the version my parents told everyone back then, it wasn't the truth. Not even close. And the lie they built my exile on would eventually destroy everything they had. But we'll get there. Because the story of how a family turns against its own daughter doesn't begin with a slammed door. It starts years earlier, with quiet choices, small betrayals, and a house where love always came with conditions. Like I said before, doors remember. And the one my parents closed that night, it never forgot. When people hear that my parents kicked me out at 16, they usually assume something dramatic must have happened. A huge fight, police, some wild teenage rebellion. But the truth is quieter than that. The truth started years earlier, inside a house where love had very specific rules. And I didn't understand those rules until it was already too late. Our house sat on a corner lot in a neat suburban neighborhood outside Sacramento. Beige siding, a small maple tree in the front yard, the kind of place that looked perfect from the street. Inside, everything had its place. My mother liked things orderly. Dinner was always at 6 p.m. sharp. Shoes stayed by the door. Homework finished before television. To anyone visiting, my parents looked like the kind of people who had everything figured out. My father, Thomas Bennett, worked as a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company. Polished, charming, the kind of man who could convince a stranger he'd known them for years. My mother, Claudia Bennett, ran a small home decor business and volunteered for every school fundraiser in the district. People loved her. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthdays and baked elaborate desserts for neighborhood events. From the outside, we were the family everyone trusted. But inside the house, the rules were different. Because there were two kinds of children in that house. The one who could do no wrong, and the one who was always being corrected. My younger brother, Adrian, was the golden child, 2 years younger than me. Athletic, charismatic, naturally good at almost everything. Teachers adored him. Neighbors praised him. My mother practically glowed when people talked about his soccer games. I remember one specific Saturday when I was 13. Adrian had scored the winning goal in a tournament, and my parents threw a little celebration dinner. My mother invited neighbors over. There was cake, sparkling cider, the whole thing. At one point, Mrs. Keller from next door smiled at my mother and asked, "And what about Leora? What's she been up to lately?" My mother looked at me, not angry, just thoughtful. Then she said something I still hear sometimes when I'm lying awake at night. "Oh, Leora's more independent. She keeps to herself." It sounded harmless, but I knew what it meant. Adrian was the pride. I was the afterthought. Now, don't get me wrong, my parents weren't monsters. They never screamed every day, they didn't hit me. It was subtler than that. It was the way my father would double check my homework, but never Adrian's. The way my mother would sigh when I disagreed with her about something small. The way mistakes stuck to me longer. Adrian could forget to take out the trash and everyone would laugh. If I forgot, it became a conversation about responsibility, about attitude, about how difficult I could be sometimes. And slowly, over the years, I learned something important about my place in that house. I was the problem that needed managing. Adrian was the future that needed protecting. At 14, I started spending more time outside the house. Libraries, after-school study programs, part-time work at a small cafe 2 blocks from school. I told people I liked staying busy, but the truth? It was easier than being home. One night I came back from work around 9:30 p.m. The house was quiet except for the television in the living room. My father sat in his usual recliner. My mother looked up from a magazine. "You're late," she said. "I had a closing shift," I replied. My father muted the television. "You shouldn't be out this late at your age." I remember standing there in the doorway, still wearing my apron, smelling like coffee grounds and dish soap. "I told you my schedule this morning," I said. That was when my mother gave me that look, the one that meant I had crossed some invisible line. "You always have an answer," she said calmly, and that sentence hung in the air like smoke. To them, having an answer meant having an attitude. It meant challenging authority. It meant being difficult. Adrian walked through the room a few minutes later with a bowl of cereal and asked if he could go to a friend's house the next day. My father didn't hesitate. "Of course." No lecture, no questions, just yes. I didn't say anything, but something inside me started noticing patterns that would matter later. Another memory sticks with me. I was 15 and applying for a summer internship program through my school, something related to architectural drafting. I had always loved old buildings. Something about the way structures held history fascinated me. I showed the application to my parents at dinner. My father skimmed the paper. My mother frowned slightly. "That seems ambitious," she said. "Your grades are good, but those programs are competitive." "I know," I said, "but I want to try." My father folded the paper. "You should focus on realistic options, Leora." Realistic. That word came up a lot when we talked about my future. Adrian, meanwhile, was already being described as exceptional. When I got accepted into the program a month later, my parents congratulated me politely. But the excitement I felt? It didn't seem to belong in that house. Looking back now, I realized something important. My parents had already decided who I was, and who I wasn't, and when. Families decide your role early enough. Any attempt to step outside it starts to look like rebellion. Which is exactly what happened a year later, because when I was 16, something occurred that gave my parents the perfect excuse to confirm what they already believed about me. That I was reckless, that I couldn't be trusted, that I was the kind of daughter who brought shame into a house. But here's the thing. The story they told everyone that year, the one that got me thrown out, it wasn't just exaggerated. It was a lie. A lie that protected someone else, someone my parents refused to question. And the night that lie exploded was the night the front door closed behind me for the last time. If you've ever felt like the designated problem child in a family, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you do, tell me in the comments. What would you have done in my place? Because when the truth finally came out years later, my parents would wish they had asked that question themselves. The night everything fell apart started out completely normal, which is strange because the moments that change your life forever rarely announce themselves. It was April 22nd, a Friday. I was 16 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with a half-finished geometry assignment while the smell of my mother's baked chicken filled the house. Adrian had just gotten home from soccer practice and was raiding the fridge like he always did. My father wouldn't be home until later. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. Just another ordinary evening inside a house that looked perfectly stable from the outside. But by midnight, I would be standing on the front lawn with a backpack and nowhere to go. And everyone in that house would believe I had done something unforgivable. The trouble started around 8:15 p.m. I had gone upstairs to my room after dinner, headphones on, sketching building layouts in a notebook. It was something I did when I needed quiet. The house was mostly silent until I heard Adrian yelling. At first I thought he was on a video game, but then I heard my mother's voice, sharp, panicked. "Adrian, what happened?" I pulled off my headphones and stepped into the hallway. The front door had slammed open downstairs. My brother was standing in the entryway, breathing hard. His shirt was dirty, one sleeve torn, and there was blood on his lip. My mother rushed toward him. "Oh my God, what happened?" Adrian glanced up the stairs, right at me, and in that moment something flickered across his face. Not pain, not fear, something else. Calculation. "I told her to stop," he said. My mother froze. "What?" Adrian pointed toward the staircase, toward me. "Leora hit me." The words landed like a dropped plate. For a second, the house went completely silent. I blinked. "What?" "You shoved me," Adrian continued quickly. "Outside near the driveway." My chest tightened. "That's not—" My mother turned toward me slowly. Her expression had already changed. Disappointment. The familiar kind. "Leora," she said carefully. "Is that true?" "No." The word came out instantly. "I've been upstairs the whole time." Adrian laughed under his breath. "Sure." My heart started pounding. "I didn't touch you," I said. My mother knelt beside him, inspecting the cut on his lip. "How did this happen then?" Adrian hesitated just long enough to make it look convincing. "She got mad because I told Mom about the party she went to last weekend." That part was technically true. I had gone to a friend's birthday gathering, but it wasn't some wild party. There were 6 people, pizza, and a movie. Still, my parents hadn't approved, and Adrian knew exactly how to frame it. My mother stood slowly. "You lied about where you were?" "It wasn't like that," I said, quickly. "You told us you were studying," she replied. "I was most of the night," Adrian interrupted. "She pushed me when I told her I was going to tell you." My stomach dropped, because suddenly the story made sense. He had been in a fight, probably with someone from his soccer team. But if he told the truth, my parents would ask questions. And Adrian Bennett wasn't used to being the problem. So he had done something clever. He had handed them a version of events they already believed. That I was difficult, that I overreacted, that I caused trouble. And the worst part? My parents were already leaning toward believing him. My mother crossed her arms. "Leora, I didn't do this," I said. "You've been argumentative lately," she replied. Argumentative. That word again. The one that meant my side of the story didn't matter. Mom, he's lying, Adrian scoffed. Wow. The front door opened behind us. My father walked in, loosening his tie. What's going on? My mother gestured toward Adrian. Your daughter attacked your son. The sentence felt unreal, like someone had taken a normal evening and twisted it into a different story entirely. My father looked at Adrian's lip, then at me. What happened? I didn't touch him, I said. Adrian shook his head slowly. I tried to calm her down. My father's jaw tightened. You hit your brother? No. Then explain the blood. I don't know. The room felt like it was shrinking. I kept looking at Adrian, waiting for him to crack, waiting for him to laugh and admit it was stupid. But he didn't. He held the story perfectly, and my parents didn't question it. That was the part that hurt the most. Not the accusation, not the yelling that followed. It was the speed with which they accepted the worst possible version of me. My father's voice grew colder with every sentence. You've been pushing boundaries for months. That's not. You lie about where you go. I told you. And now this? I didn't hit him. Adrian stood quietly beside my mother, letting the story settle into place. My father pointed toward the hallway. Go to your room. Dad, now. I walked upstairs in a daze. From my bedroom window, I could see the driveway, the streetlight flickering slightly. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong, so quickly. An hour passed, then 2. No one came upstairs. Around 11:30 p.m., my father finally opened the door. His face looked different. Not angry anymore. Something worse. Resolved. Pack a bag. My heart stopped. What? You need time to think about your behavior. I didn't. You've brought enough chaos into this house. Chaos. 16 years old, and suddenly I was chaos. Where am I supposed to go? You can stay with your aunt for a while. But she lives 2 states away. My father didn't blink. You'll figure something out. The words echoed inside the room. Figure something out. I packed a backpack, clothes, my sketchbook, $43 from my desk drawer. When I came downstairs, my mother avoided my eyes. Adrian sat on the couch watching television, like nothing had happened. My father opened the front door. Cold air rushed in. You are not welcome here until you learn how to take responsibility. The porch light flickered on, and then the door closed behind me. The lock clicked. Just like that. 16 years old, standing in the yard, with a lie hanging over my head, and the strange realization that the people inside that house had already decided who I was. The street was quiet. No one came outside. No one asked questions. And as I stood there, staring at the door that had just erased me from my own family, one thought kept repeating in my mind. Doors remember. But that night, I didn't know if I would ever see the other side of that one again. If you've ever been blamed for something you didn't do, you know the feeling, the helplessness, the disbelief. Type karma in the comments if you believe the truth always finds its way out eventually. Because for 10 years, my parents believed Adrian's story. 10 years. Until the day that lie finally collapsed. But first, I had to survive. And those first few years after that door closed were the hardest of my life. The first night after my parents locked me out, I didn't go far. Not because I had somewhere better to go, because I didn't. I walked 3 blocks down the street and sat on the swings at the small park behind our neighborhood elementary school. The metal chains creaked softly every time the wind pushed them. It was just past midnight. The playground lights were off, but the nearby street lamp cast enough glow that I could still see the outline of the houses in the distance. One of those houses had been mine. Or at least, I had believed it was. I remember staring down at my backpack sitting in the dirt by my feet. $43, 2 shirts, my sketchbook, and a geometry textbook I hadn't even finished the assignment in. 16 years old. And suddenly, no place to sleep. People like to imagine there's some dramatic turning point in moments like that. Some surge of courage where you instantly decide to take control of your life. But the truth? The first thing I felt wasn't determination. It was embarrassment. I kept thinking about the neighbors, about whether anyone had seen me standing on the lawn while my father shut the door, about whether Adrian had already told his version of the story to his friends, because I knew exactly how it would sound. Leora attacked her brother. Leora got kicked out. The problem child finally pushed too far. I stayed on that swing until around 2:30 a.m. Then the cold started creeping through my jacket. I needed somewhere warm, somewhere with lights. That's how I ended up at Dawson's Diner. It sat near the highway, about 20 minutes away if you walked fast. I had passed it 100 times but had never gone inside before. The neon sign buzzed faintly above the door. Inside, the place smelled like coffee and fried potatoes. There were only 2 customers sitting at the counter, and a woman behind the register who looked like she had been working the night shift for about 20 years. She glanced at me when I walked in. Her eyes moved from my backpack to my face. Then she said something that, looking back, probably saved me. "You look frozen. Sit down." I slid onto a stool. My hands were shaking. "Coffee?" she asked. "I only have—" She poured it anyway. "No charge." For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. I wrapped my hands around the mug and tried to warm up. Eventually, she leaned her elbows on the counter. "You run away?" she asked calmly. "Or get thrown out?" The question caught me off guard. I stared into the coffee. "Thrown out." She nodded once, like she'd seen that before. "Parents?" "Yes." She sighed softly. "Well, you can stay here until morning. But after that, kid, you need a plan." Her name was Marla, and I would later realize she was the first adult who treated me like a human being instead of a problem. Around 6 a.m., she handed me a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. "You ever worked in a kitchen?" "I worked at a cafe." She raised an eyebrow. "You need a job?" I blinked. "Right now?" "Right now." That was the moment something shifted. Because the truth was, I had spent most of the night waiting for my parents to show up, waiting for someone to say it was all a mistake. But they didn't come. And Marla's question made something clear. No one was coming. So I nodded. "Yes." She pointed toward the back hallway. "Dish pits through there." And just like that, survival started. The work was brutal. 10-hour shifts, grease-coated plates stacked higher than the sink, steam that left my hands red and aching. But Marla paid me in cash, and she let me crash in the storage room on a fold-out cot for the first few weeks. It wasn't comfortable, but it was safe. During the day, I still went to school. That part was harder. Rumors spread fast in high school, especially when the story involved violence. By Monday morning, half the students already believed I had lost it and attacked Adrian. A few teachers looked at me differently. One counselor called me into her office and asked if I needed anger management support. I remember sitting there thinking how strange it was. The truth didn't matter anymore. The story had already been decided. A few times I tried calling my parents. The first call went straight to voicemail. The second rang twice before disconnecting. After that, my number was blocked. I wrote a letter once, 3 pages explaining everything. I left it in our mailbox one evening after school. The next day it was gone, but no one called, no one replied. That was when I understood something painful. My parents weren't just punishing me, they had erased me. Months passed. I saved every dollar I could. Eventually, I rented a tiny room above a mechanic shop on the edge of town. The place smelled like motor oil and the radiator clanged all night, but it had a lock, and the key belonged to me. I finished high school while working nights at the diner. Marla would sometimes slide extra pancakes onto my plate before closing. "You're tougher than you look," she told me once. I shrugged. I don't feel tough. That's how real tough people usually feel. She was the one who pushed me to apply for college scholarships. The one who helped me fill out forms at the diner counter during slow hours. The one who reminded me that being thrown away didn't mean I was worthless. And slowly, piece by piece, my life started rebuilding itself. Not quickly, not easily, but steadily. Like repairing an old structure, one beam at a time. Years later, when people ask how I managed to move forward after everything that happened, I usually tell them something simple. I stopped waiting for the door to reopen. Because some doors never do. And sometimes, the only way forward is to build your own house somewhere else. But here's the strange part. Even after everything, I still thought about my parents sometimes. Wondered if they ever questioned Adrian's story. Wondered if the truth ever bothered them. It turns out, it didn't. Not for a very long time. Because Adrian didn't just lie once. He built an entire life around that lie. And my parents protected it until the day everything collapsed. The day they finally realized what they had done, and why they were standing on my porch 10 years later, asking me to open the door. If you've ever had to rebuild your life from almost nothing, you know how quiet those victories are. Tell me in the comments if you've ever had to start over like that. Because the next part of my story, that's when things finally began to change. That's when survival slowly turned into something else, something stronger. The beginning of a life my parents never imagined I could build. And the beginning of the moment that would eventually bring them back to my door. There's a strange kind of quiet that comes with rebuilding your life. No applause, no dramatic turning point. Just small decisions made every day that slowly change where you're standing. For me, that shift started when I was 19 years old, sitting at a scratched diner table after a night shift, staring at a scholarship acceptance letter. I had read it 3 times already, then a fourth, then a fifth, because my brain kept waiting for the part where it said, "Just kidding," but it never did. I had been accepted into a state university architecture program with a partial scholarship. Not enough to cover everything, but enough to make it possible. Marla leaned against the counter, watching me read the letter again. "Well?" she asked. I looked up. "I got in." She grinned like she had known all along. "Good, because you're too smart to spend the rest of your life scrubbing plates." I folded the letter carefully. "What if I can't afford the rest?" She shrugged. "You'll figure it out." Those 3 words again. figure it out. Except this time, they didn't feel like abandonment. They felt like trust. And that made all the difference. College was nothing like the world I had grown up in. No one knew the story about Adrian. No one looked at me like I was the problem. I was just another student carrying rolled up blueprints across campus and surviving on cheap coffee. I worked 2 part-time jobs while studying, morning shifts at a campus cafe, evening drafting work for a small local contractor who needed help converting old paper plans into digital models. It was exhausting. But something inside me had changed. For the first time, the effort felt like it was building something real, not just surviving, creating. Architecture turned out to be exactly what I needed, because restoring buildings isn't just about fixing walls. It's about understanding why something broke in the first place. You study pressure points, structural weaknesses, the places where time quietly erodes strength. And slowly, you learn how to reinforce those points without destroying the whole structure. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was studying my own life, learning how to rebuild something that had been abandoned. In my second year, I met Professor Daniel Halverson. He taught historical restoration. Tall, quiet, always carrying a leather notebook filled with sketches. During our first project review, he studied my design for a long time without speaking. Finally, he tapped the page. "You're thinking like someone who understands damage." I hesitated. "What do you mean?" "Most students want to replace broken things," he said. "You're trying to stabilize them." I wasn't sure how to answer that, so I just said the truth. "I guess I like saving things people assume are beyond repair." He nodded slowly. "That's rare." After that, he became something like a mentor. Not in a dramatic movie kind of way, just small moments. Extra feedback after class, a recommendation for an internship with a restoration firm that specialized in historic buildings. That internship changed everything. The company restored century-old theaters, courthouses, and libraries. Buildings everyone else considered too fragile to save. The first time I walked through a decaying opera house with cracked plaster ceilings and warped floors, I felt something settle inside me. This was it. This was the work I wanted to do, rebuilding the forgotten. And by the time I graduated at 23, I had already been offered a junior position with that firm. It paid enough to move into my first real apartment, a small place in Portland with squeaky floorboards and windows that rattled during winter storms. But when I turned the key in that door for the first time, something hit me harder than I expected. No one could take this from me. No one could decide I didn't belong there, because this time, I built it myself. The next few years passed faster than I expected. Projects stacked on top of each other. An old courthouse restoration, a historic hotel lobby, a theater renovation that turned into the biggest project of my career so far. By 27, I had been promoted to project manager. At 29, I made the scariest decision of my life. I left the firm, started my own restoration company. 3 employees, a rented office above a bakery, 1 secondhand truck filled with tools. Most people thought it was too risky, but risk didn't scare me anymore. After sleeping in a diner storage room at 16, everything else felt manageable. The company grew slowly. 1 project turned into 2, then 5. By the time I turned 31, we were restoring some of the most historic buildings in the region. And eventually, I bought something I never imagined I'd have. A house. Not huge, not flashy, but solid. 2 floors, large front windows, and an oak front door that closed with a deep, reassuring weight. The first night I slept there, I stood in the hallway for a long time just listening to the quiet. No yelling, no accusations, no one deciding who I was supposed to be. Just silence, peaceful silence, and a life that finally felt stable. But here's something strange about the past. It doesn't always stay buried. Even when you move thousands of miles away, even when you build an entirely different life, sometimes it waits, quietly, for the right moment to reappear. For me, that moment arrived on a cold Tuesday evening, December 14th, 6:42 p.m. I was standing in my kitchen reviewing a set of blueprints when someone knocked on my front door. 3 slow knocks, firm, heavy. I walked down the hallway toward the security screen, and when the camera feed appeared, my breath caught in my throat. Because standing under the porch light were the 2 people who had once erased me from their lives. My mother and my father. 10 years older, 10 years quieter, looking nothing like the people who had closed that door behind me when I was 16. They looked tired, worried, almost desperate. My father leaned toward the camera. "Leora, we know you're home." And, for the first time in a decade, my past was standing on my porch, knocking. If you had been in my place at that moment, staring at the faces of the people who once threw you away, what would you have done? Opened the door? Ignored them? Or made them wait? Because what happened next was something none of us were prepared for. And the reason they had come to my house that night was far worse than I imagined. For a long moment, I didn't move. The security screen glowed faintly in the hallway, showing my parents standing on the porch like 2 people who had wandered to the wrong house. 10 years. 10 years without a call, a letter, a single apology. And now they were here, knocking. My father shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He looked thinner than I remembered. The sharp confidence he used to carry in his posture had softened into something uncertain. My mother stood beside him, clutching her purse with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her steady. Another knock. 3 taps against the oak. The sound echoed through the quiet hallway. For a second, 16-year-old me flashed through my mind. Standing on the front lawn under a streetlight, a backpack hanging off one shoulder, watching my father close the door. That sound. The click of the lock. Doors remember. I took a slow breath. Then I walked toward the door. But I didn't open it yet. Instead, I spoke through the intercom. "Yes?" My mother startled slightly when my voice came through the speaker. "Leora, please," she said quickly. "Open the door." Her voice had changed. It used to carry a sharp certainty. Now it sounded fragile. "What do you want?" I asked. The pause that followed felt heavier than the knock. My father leaned toward the camera. "We need to talk." I almost laughed. 10 years of silence, and suddenly they needed to talk. "You could have done that 10 years ago," I said. My mother's eyes dropped to the porch floor. "We know," she whispered. Another silence. Cold air fogged around them as they stood there. December wind rattled the bare branches in my yard. My father cleared his throat. "Leora, we made a mistake." The sentence felt strange coming from him. Growing up, my father didn't admit mistakes. He corrected them, managed them, but he never owned them. I crossed my arms. What kind of mistake? He hesitated, and that hesitation told me something important. Whatever brought them here tonight, it was bigger than guilt. Finally, he said it. It's about Adrian. The name landed in my chest like a dropped weight. 10 years. 10 years since I had heard my brother's name spoken in my direction. What about him? I asked. My mother's grip tightened around her purse. He's in trouble. Of course he was. Something about that felt inevitable. What kind of trouble? My father looked down the street briefly before answering. Legal trouble. That word hung in the air. Legal. 100 possibilities ran through my head. Debt, fraud, drugs. But none of them explained why my parents were standing on my porch. My mother stepped closer to the camera. Can we please come inside? No. The answer came faster than I expected. My father's jaw tightened slightly. Leora, you threw me out of your house when I was 16. My voice stayed calm, almost conversational. You told me I wasn't welcome until I learned responsibility. Neither of them spoke. So now we can talk out here. Cold wind moved across the porch. My father rubbed his hands together. Adrian has been arrested. The sentence didn't surprise me as much as it probably should have. For what? I asked. My mother swallowed. Financial fraud. I blinked. What? He worked for an investment firm, my father said quietly. A small one. And? My father exhaled slowly. And he manipulated client accounts. I felt something strange stir in my chest. Not satisfaction, not exactly. More like confirmation. Because suddenly a memory surfaced. Adrian standing in the hallway at 16, blood on his lip, telling a lie so smoothly it sounded rehearsed. A person who could do that at 16 probably didn't stop there. How bad? I asked. My parents exchanged a glance. Then my father said something that explained everything. Several $1,000,000. I stared at the screen. Several million? He didn't act alone, my father added quickly. Of course not. My mother's voice trembled slightly. He says he was pressured by his supervisor. I almost smiled at that. Adrian had always been good at shifting responsibility. So why are you here? I asked. My father hesitated. My stomach tightened. Because I already knew. We need help, he said finally. There it was. The real reason. You think I can fix this? You run a successful company, my mother said quickly. You know people. The words felt surreal. 10 years ago, I was a disgrace. Now suddenly I was useful. Let me understand this, I said calmly. You believed Adrian when he said I attacked him. Neither of them responded. You locked me out of the house. Still silence. You ignored every attempt I made to explain what really happened. My father shifted uncomfortably, and then my mother said something that made my chest go still. We know the truth now. The hallway seemed to shrink around me. What truth? My mother looked directly at the camera. Adrian admitted he lied. 10 years. 10 years for that sentence to arrive. I leaned against the wall. And when did he decide to tell you that? My father answered. 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. After a decade. I laughed softly under my breath. That's convenient. Leora, You believed him instantly when he blamed me. My voice stayed calm, but something sharp moved underneath it. And now you believe him again when he says he lied? My mother's eyes filled slightly. We were wrong. I studied their faces on the screen, the exhaustion, the fear, the desperation. And for the first time, the power in this conversation felt different. Because the people who once controlled everything about my life were now standing outside my door, waiting, cold, uncertain. And suddenly my father said something that made the entire situation even clearer. The lawyers say Adrian could face serious prison time. There it was, the real fear. And then my mother spoke the sentence they had come here to say. Leora, we need you to help us save your brother. The request hung in the hallway like smoke. 10 years ago, they chose him over me, without hesitation. And now they wanted me to rescue him. I reached for the door handle, turned it slowly. The lock clicked open. The door swung inward. My parents looked up with a flicker of hope, but I didn't step aside. I stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance, looking at the two people who had erased me from their lives. And I said something they clearly weren't expecting. If you want my help, I paused, let the moment settle. Then the truth about what happened when I was 16 comes out first. My father's face went pale. My mother looked confused. What do you mean? She asked. I held their gaze. The whole truth. Because what they didn't know yet was that Adrian's lie had already started unraveling long before they showed up on my porch. And the evidence was something none of them were prepared to face. For a long moment, none of us moved. Cold air drifted through the open doorway, carrying the faint smell of pine from the trees along the street. My parents stood on the porch, looking at me like they were trying to figure out who I had become. And honestly, I understood the confusion. The last time they had seen me, I was a scared 16-year-old girl holding a backpack. Now I was a 31-year-old woman standing in the doorway of my own house, calm, steady, not angry, just done pretending the past hadn't happened. My father cleared his throat. What truth are you talking about? I stepped back slightly, leaving the door open. You can come inside, I said. They exchanged a quick glance, then slowly stepped over the threshold. I watched their eyes move around the hallway, the framed architectural sketches on the walls, the hardwood floors, the staircase leading upstairs. My mother ran her fingers lightly across the edge of the entry table, like she was confirming it was real. This is your house? She asked quietly. Yes. My father nodded once, almost impressed. But the admiration didn't last long. Because the moment they sat down in the living room, I placed a small black laptop on the coffee table between us. And suddenly the atmosphere changed. My mother frowned. What is this? I sat across from them. This, I said calmly, is the reason I told you the truth comes first. My father leaned forward slightly. Leora, we already know Adrian lied. No, I said. You know he admitted lying. There's a difference. My mother's brow tightened. I don't understand. I opened the laptop. The screen lit up with a paused video frame. A timestamp in the corner read, April 22nd, 8:09 p.m. My father's eyes narrowed. What is that? I tapped the keyboard. The video began playing. The footage was grainy, black and white, the angle slightly tilted. But the scene was unmistakable. Our old driveway. A teenage Adrian standing near the garage, arguing with another boy. I watched my parents' faces carefully as the video continued. The other boy shoved Adrian. Adrian swung back. The fight lasted maybe 15 seconds. Then Adrian stumbled backward and slammed his mouth against the edge of the garbage bin. That's when the blood appeared, exactly where the cut on his lip had been. My mother gasped softly. My father stared at the screen like it might disappear. The video ended. The room fell silent. Finally, my father whispered, "Where did you get this?" I closed the laptop slowly. "From the neighbor across the street." Both of them looked up. "Mr. Keller installed security cameras in 2009, I said, "after someone broke into his garage." My mother blinked. "He recorded the driveway?" "Part of it." My father leaned back slowly. "But if he had this, why didn't he say anything?" I held his gaze. "He did." That made my mother sit up. "What?" "He showed you the footage the next day." My father's expression shifted. Confusion, then something darker. "That's not possible." I shook my head. "It is." My mother looked at him. "Thomas?" My father rubbed his forehead. That doesn't sound right." I spoke gently. "He told you Adrian was in a fight with another boy." My father's face slowly drained of color. "And you told him," I continued, "that family matters were none of his business." The room went completely still. My mother turned toward my father. "Is that true?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. She stood up slowly. "You knew?" His voice cracked slightly. "I didn't know." "You just said—" "I thought it was a misunderstanding." My laugh came out softer than I expected. "A misunderstanding?" My father looked at me helplessly. "Adrian swore the footage didn't show everything." "So you believed him?" Silence. My mother looked like someone had just pulled the ground out from under her. "You saw proof," she whispered. "And you still blamed her?" My father didn't respond, and that's when something finally shifted inside the room. Because for the first time in 10 years, the weight of that night wasn't sitting on my shoulders anymore. It had moved, back where it belonged. My mother sank into the chair. "Oh my God." Her voice barely carried across the room. "You threw her out." My father looked at me. "I thought you were lying." I shrugged slightly. That seemed to happen a lot. The silence stretched. Then my mother covered her mouth with her hand. "All those years." She looked around my living room again, at the life she had never bothered to see. "We lost 10 years." I didn't respond, because that part was obvious. My father leaned forward again. "Why didn't you show us this before?" "That video was recorded by Mr. Keller," I said. "He passed away 4 years ago." My mother frowned. "So how did you get it?" "I visited his daughter last year." I remembered the conversation clearly. A small house 2 towns over. Boxes of old security hard drives stacked in the garage. She had been sorting through them, and one of the files caught my attention. April 22nd. When I watched it, something inside my chest had gone very still. Proof. 10 years late, but still proof. My father looked down at his hands. "You should have told us." I tilted my head slightly. "Should I?" He didn't answer, because deep down he knew the truth. They had already decided who I was long before that night. The video wouldn't have changed their minds then. But now everything was different. My mother wiped her eyes. Adrian destroyed this family. I shook my head slowly. No. They both looked at me. He told a lie, I said, but you chose to believe it. The room went quiet again, and that was when my father finally asked the question they had been avoiding since they arrived. So, will you help him? I studied their faces carefully. The guilt, the fear, the hope. And then I gave them the only honest answer I had. No. My mother's head snapped up. What? I'm not helping Adrian. My father leaned forward urgently. Leora, he's your brother. He stopped being that the night he destroyed my life. But prison is a consequence. The words settled heavily in the room. I stood up slowly. You asked for the truth. I gestured toward the laptop. Now you have it. My parents sat there silently, and for the first time since they knocked on my door, they understood something important. The power in this story had changed, completely. But what they didn't realize yet was that the consequences of Adrian's lie were only just beginning. Because when the truth finally collapses a decade of deception, it rarely stops with one person. And the next thing my parents would learn was that the damage their choices caused couldn't be undone with a single apology. Not anymore. For a while, none of us spoke. The living room felt smaller than it had 10 minutes earlier. Not physically, but emotionally. The truth has that effect sometimes. It rearranges the air in a room. My parents sat across from me, both staring at the closed laptop on the coffee table like it was something fragile they were afraid to touch. 10 years of certainty had just collapsed in less than 5 minutes. My mother's shoulders were trembling slightly. My father looked older than I had ever seen him. And for the first time in my life, neither of them seemed to know what to say. I walked to the kitchen, not to escape, just to breathe. The kettle clicked on automatically as I filled it with water. A small routine, something simple. Because moments like this can easily spiral into something loud and emotional. But I didn't want loud. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. When I came back into the living room with 3 cups of tea, my parents were still sitting exactly where I had left them, frozen. I placed the cups on the table. My mother looked up. You're making us tea? I gave a small shrug. You drove a long way. Her eyes filled again. That probably confused her. But kindness and forgiveness aren't the same thing. That's something I learned the hard way. We sat there quietly for a minute. Steam curled up from the cups. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street. Eventually, my father spoke. I don't know how to fix this. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. And strangely enough, that sentence didn't bring me satisfaction, just reality. Some things can't be fixed, I said calmly. My mother shook her head. No, there has to be something we can do. Her voice cracked on the last word. You're our daughter. The sentence landed between us like something that had been buried for years. Daughter. I studied her face for a moment. Then I asked a question that had lived quietly in the back of my mind for a long time. When was the last time you called me that? She didn't answer, because we both knew the truth. Before the door closed, before the lock clicked, before they decided who I was. My father rubbed his hands together nervously. We made a terrible mistake. Yes, I said, and mistakes have consequences. My mother looked up again. But families forgive each other. I took a sip of tea before answering. Sometimes. The room went quiet again, and then she asked the question that had been hanging over everything since they arrived. Are you saying you don't want us in your life? I didn't respond immediately, because the honest answer deserved a careful delivery. Finally, I said, I'm saying I can't pretend the last 10 years didn't happen. My father nodded slowly. That's fair. My mother looked between us. But we can start over. The words sounded hopeful, almost desperate. I leaned back slightly in the chair. Starting over means rebuilding trust. Yes, she said quickly, and trust takes time. We have time. I held her gaze gently. No, we don't. That sentence seemed to land deeper than the others, because time had already passed. 10 years of it. 10 birthdays, 10 holidays, 10 years of silence. There's a strange thing about relationships. You can rebuild structures, you can repair bridges, but some absences stretch so long they become permanent parts of the landscape. And that's when I said something I had thought about many times over the years. I don't hate you. Both of them looked up at once. But I also don't need you anymore. The truth of that sentence settled into the others' room slowly. My life wasn't empty. It wasn't broken. It was full. Friends, colleagues, mentors, employees who trusted me with their livelihoods, and a home I had built without them. My mother's voice was barely above a whisper. So what happens now? I stood up and walked toward the front door. They both watched me, waiting. I opened it. Cold winter air drifted inside again. Then I turned back toward them. You're welcome to contact me. Hope flickered briefly in my mother's eyes. But slowly, I added. No emergencies. No financial requests. And no pretending the past didn't happen. My father stood carefully. That seems reasonable. My mother rose beside him. She looked around the living room one last time, at the life she had never seen growing. I'm proud of you, she said quietly. It was the first time I had ever heard her say those words to me. 31 years old, and hearing it for the first time. But strangely, it didn't feel like the victory she might have expected. It just felt late. Still, I nodded. Thank you. They walked toward the door slowly. My father paused before stepping outside. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. But I hope someday we earn a second chance. I didn't promise anything, because promises should be honest, and honesty was something our family had struggled with for a long time. My mother stepped onto the porch. Then my father followed. I stood in the doorway watching them walk down the path toward their car. Older, quieter, carrying the weight of choices they couldn't undo. Just before my father opened the car door, he turned back. For a moment, our eyes met across the driveway. Then he gave a small nod and got in. The car pulled away slowly. Its headlights disappeared around the corner. The street fell quiet again. I stood there for another minute, feeling the cold air on my face. Then I stepped back inside and closed the door. The oak settled into place with a deep, solid sound. Not a slam, not anger, just closure. Because here's the thing I've learned after everything that happened. Families aren't defined by who shares your last name. They're defined by who stands beside you when the door closes. And sometimes, the healthiest thing you can do is build a life strong enough that when the past finally comes knocking, You get to decide whether the door opens or stays closed. Doors remember, but now, this one belongs to me. If you've ever had to rebuild your life after being rejected by the people who were supposed to protect you, you know how complicated moments like this can be. Tell me in the comments, would you have opened the door at all? And if you believe the truth always finds its way out eventually, type karma below. Because sometimes it takes 10 years, but the truth does come back knocking. If this story stayed with you until the very end, thank you for listening. Stories like this remind us that life doesn't always give us justice right away. Sometimes it takes years for the truth to come back around. But when it does, the people who rebuilt themselves quietly are often the strongest ones standing. If Leora's journey meant something to you, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you might think and allows stories like this to reach others who may need to hear them. And I'd really like to hear from you. Would you have opened the door? Or would you have left it closed? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Until the next story, take care of yourselves, and remember, sometimes the door that closes on you is the one that teaches you how to build your own house.